that noise. Every time I hear that music, I know I'm in for a treat because it's time for another edition of the Rec Poker podcast. Usually when you're hearing my voice, we're here to talk about a strategy post in the Rec Poker forums because Steve Fredland, the man himself, hosts our Chats podcast where we interview the great names of the poker cognoscenti. Today he can't make it. He's playing in a tournament. Lucky guy. So I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home games. And you can find out about me by going to rec.poker/crew. And then you can learn about all the other members of the Wrecking Crew, like the one and only freaking Dara O'Kearney, who's here today to talk about his new book. So Dara, without further ado, welcome to the show. And thanks for being here, man.
Thanks very much, Jim. Delighted to be here and really appreciate you gentlemen getting up early for once. Normally when I come here, it's me staying up late for you guys. I'm not sure which part of the day my mind works better. If I'm a little bit less lucid than normal, you'll have to give me a break. It's also quite early for me.
Yeah, well, we're not, as poker players, we're not usually skewing towards the earlier hours in the day, but I think this is going to work out just great. And I should, of course, Steve is so good at this. I should thank our sponsors, Website Amp and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. So we've got a couple fun things we'll talk about at the end of the show. Colin Anderson's birthday is coming up. Keith Monkey System Brandt is doing a study group, and we're actually taking a little hiatus when we all go down to WSOP. We'll get into some of that information after we finish our interview with Dara. But Dara, maybe that's a good segue into what we were talking about. I know you've got some exciting news, but before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the WSOP is right around the corner. International travelers have kind of a unique circumstance this year. Now, I live in Canada. I'm coming down anyway. Because Canada and Mexico are one of the countries that you can be in for a while before you transfer into the States. But can you just talk a little bit about what that kind of experience has been like for you and how you're planning around this year's WSOP?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. There's been huge anticipation for the WSOP this year among Europeans, not just guys like me who normally go, but a lot of recreational players were this was the year they were going to go. Because obviously everybody's been sort of, stuck inside for the last 18 months. There's actually been no live poker here during that time either. The last live event we played was 18 months ago here in Dublin, a Unibet Open. So people were really looking forward to this. And I was getting asked so many questions about it that I actually wrote an entire blog just on my sort of, if this is your first time going to Vegas, this is what you should look out for and be aware of. And that was early this summer where we assumed that there would be no issue with traveling. The case numbers were dropping, etc. But the travel restrictions are still in place. So I kind of went from initially thinking, yeah, I'm definitely going and I'm really looking forward to it, to then having to decide, do I want to spend 2 weeks in Mexico? Canada wasn't even an option for us because Canada has restrictions on us traveling into Canada as well. So really it was just Mexico or Costa Rica or somewhere like that. A few of my friends have done that, like they're already in Mexico, spending their 2 weeks in quarantine before they're allowed to go into the US. But I didn't really feel that I could do that. So I kind of went from, yes, I'm definitely going, to yes, I'm definitely not going. But then last week they announced that the travel restrictions are going to be lifted from the EU to the US in early November. So it was kind of back on again. And myself and David were looking at flights and we were trying to work out what date we could go over to play the main, thinking, well, if we really want to get there on the 5th, we'd be playing the 7th. That would be the last day one. And you don't want to just come straight off the plane and play your day one. But unfortunately, they haven't actually announced what exact date they're lifting the restrictions yet. So, you obviously can't book anything until you know the date. You don't want to be flying the day before you're allowed. I doubt they're going to make a special exception for you just because you want to play poker. So we're kind of waiting and seeing to when they actually announce what the actual date will be. I think even if I have to miss the main event, because obviously if unless it's very early in November, I might still go to play some of the events towards the end of the series anyway. I'm really itching to get back to Vegas. It's been 2 years now, obviously more than 2 years, obviously, because it was summer the last time. I think there's a huge anticipation for this WSOP and people kind of want to get there by hook or by crook. So yeah, it's unfortunate with the travel restrictions, but what can you do? Pandemic is the pandemic.
Yeah, it's been frustrating up here as well. I've got some family in the States. My wife has some family in the States, and they keep changing when they're going to open the border. Well, not changing. They just keep it's kind of a month by month up here as well, where the land border is still closed. You can fly down if you do the right testing and that kind of stuff, but it's just so much more convenient to be able to drive down and visit. We haven't been able to do that, and they keep just putting it off. Oh, next month we'll have a date. Next month we'll have a date. Next month we'll have a date, and it does, it makes it hard to plan around. But I mean, it's the reality of the pandemic, right? I mean, I don't want to be in charge of anything right now, because no matter what decision you make, half the world hates you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you thought like adjudicating tournament results was difficult. No, there's no winning at all for anybody right now. So yeah, that's tricky, and I hope they resolve that in a way that allows you to make some plans, because I think, and you said it, man, you don't want to be walking off the plane and then jumping into day one. So mindset, as we know, is so important to this kind of stuff. Speaking of international travelers, so this is something we've talked about on the show here a little bit, because we have a lot of Canadian and international listeners. When you go down there to play, how do you handle converting funds to US and registering from Ireland? Do you register in advance to tournaments? Do you use their online stuff? Do you just carry a bunch of cash and go to the cage? How do you handle that logistically?
It's changed down the years. I mean, in the early days, it was a matter of sort of getting money into Vegas physically. There's a 10K limit. Once you go above that, you have to declare it. But for whatever reason, poker players try to stay under the 10K. 1 year, I just said, okay, I'm going to wire all the money over that I need to the cage. That turned into an absolute nightmare, because they couldn't find the wire. And I spent about a week looking for it. They eventually found it, but there was a lot of hassle. And it was like, I might be in Vegas and I might have no money to play. That's going to really suck. So I thought, okay, well, I'm never doing that again.
Yeah.
The last time I went, it was the first. Well, at least the first time that I was aware of, where they had, you could buy in at the ATM type machines.
Yes.
And I could use my NetTeller card, which is where I keep all my online money. So that was incredibly convenient. And that's basically what I did. That's what I would anticipate doing again this time. I don't want to be physically carrying over lots of money. What we used to do like 5 or 6 years ago was you would go with, your 10 grand or whatever, and then you'd wait until somebody you knew got a big score. And then you would get whatever you needed off them for the rest of the series, and you transfer them on Stars or wherever.
Right.
And there was 1 year we all collectively had a terrible year, so nobody had any money. It's not the most foolproof of plans, but right. It's always been an enormous hassle. I have friends who've gone to the trouble of opening bank accounts in Vegas and leaving money there as well. Mm-hmm. I actually left a pile of money on WSOP.com the last time, which is now a real pain, because I can't cash it out from here, and they're taking $5 a week or something. So that's quite tilting as well.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Well, it's a logistical nightmare, and there's always like trade-offs, right? It's really a question of like, what pain do you want to embrace? Because there are no good answers for that kind of stuff. I'm curious about that when you were talking about using the kiosks. That's something we've talked about here before. Even in that case, you still have to go and sort of like get registered for the series, and then you can go and use the kiosks to register to individual tournaments. Is that right? Yeah, that's correct. You at the start of the series, you go over and you do all the ID verification checks, and then they clear you. They give you a card to use for those, or they make your player's reward card viable for those machines. It's a very bizarre system. I remember for one of the big field events last time, like, you don't get your actual ticket. You can't just get, they print you out a ticket, but it doesn't say a table and a seat number. You just have to go to the sort of the late reg desk effectively. And there was one tournament where the late reg queue was like 3.5 hours or something ridiculous. Right. So it was quite tilting that, like, you've gone to the trouble of registering and using the machine, and all it got you was the back of the queue. So yeah, for the really big runner field events, it's not great, to be honest. and so what can we do to sort of make that easier? Because I think a lot of our listeners might be going down for the first time this year. And is there it sounds like there's a lot of ways to sort of kind of get registered, but you're still going to be at the back of the line. what would you recommend people do when they get down?
Yeah, what I would say is for the really big runner field events, I don't know what they're called this year, but things like the Millionaire Maker and Colossus, etc. Register ahead of time. Register a couple of days ahead. You can register for any event at any time, so do it a few days. Don't wait till the day, because on the day the lines are just going to be insane. What I used to do was literally I would go, if I was there late one night, say 2 a.m., then I would go up and I would reg for all the events that I knew I was going to play, like the main event and particularly the big runner field events. Because when you register at the cage, you do actually get like a seat assignment, so you don't have to go through the late reg stuff. So that's the main thing I would do. And in fact, that's what I would do as well. Like, even though I'm talking about using the card, and that's what I would do for most events, for the events where the lines are likely to be very, very big, I'm definitely going to go to the cage and register in advance. So I will bring some cash to cover that stuff.
And the cage is open 24 hours, right? So it's just a question of finding when the line is short, and then just using the line when the line is short, and then just
it's a complete no-brainer. Like you go there at 10 a.m. on a day where there's something big, you're going to be in that line for 2 hours.
Yeah,
that's 2 hours of your life gone. Like, and it's not a pleasant 2 hours gradually edging up the corridor. And but if you're there at 2 a.m., you're playing late one night or something, and you go and there will be literally no line, and it's just a complete no-brainer. You're saving yourself that trauma of spending 2 hours, but surrounded by very, very annoyed and tilted people as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And you got to protect your mindset too, right? Like you don't want to, and then going from that line into your day one, right? Like that, you're not doing yourselves any favors by getting yourself all amped up and angry like everybody else in that line.
Yeah, I remember actually, that reminds me of the longest line I was ever in, that 3.5 hour line. And I got in, and by the time I got in, it was like 12 big blinds.
Right.
And I bust after 20 minutes.
Oh my God.
And then I had to it was re-entry. So I went into the line again. And my friend Jack Sinclair, who had railed this entire thing, tweeted that I'd spent longer in the line than I had in the tournament, which was true by a factor of at least 10.
Yeah, that's brutal. And I guess so. A couple trade-offs is that if you register in advance, they put your chips in play at the start of the tournament, right? So you cannot show up a couple levels late. I mean, you can, but you'll be blinding down the whole time.
Their system is quite weird. Here in Europe, we're used to, like, if you register late, whenever you show up, that's when your stack goes out. But they don't do that in the States. But then if you don't show up at all, they take your stack off the table and they give you your money back. So there's a certain point beyond which you might just decide, okay, too much of my stack is gone, I'm just going to sit this one out.
But then hold on a second. But then some of those chips are in play.
Correct.
Through the blinds, right?
Correct.
Hold on. So they just let those chips stay in play and then take the remainder of your stack off?
Correct.
Wow. So, okay. Interesting.
Now, there is one of those on every table, so I guess it kind of balances out. It's not like it introduces an extra luck element. It's always the last seat 10 or whatever, that they put that stack. That's the other thing. If you late register, you're always coming into seat 10, which is the annoying seat, one side of the dealer.
Right.
So that's another downside to late registration.
Cool. And I guess my other question on that would be, what's the etiquette on if you've got like a friend down there with you, having them stand in line for you while you're playing or something like that, and then just come and swapping out? Is that like, do people frown on that, or how does that work?
I'm the wrong person to ask on this because I'm not American. This is very much an American thing. It depends on who's around you, to be honest. If it's like non-Americans, they generally won't mind. But Americans seem to have a different queue etiquette, which actually makes more sense. Like, if you think about it, it's not really cool to like have one person and then suddenly 10 people jump into.
Oh no, I meant more
one
like
for one. I think one for one
swap out.
Yeah, nobody would have a problem with that. I think what we have a more informal approach to queues, let's say in Europe, where you might have one person and then just 10 people jump in, and that certainly annoys people. So I definitely don't recommend that.
Yes,
but yeah, one for one should be fine.
Well, it's just one of the ways that having a network is helpful. Dara was talking earlier about sharing the wealth to make it easier to re-enter tournaments if someone has a big score, having someone to run food to your table, having someone to hold a place in line just for you, of course. Those are great ways that having some friends down there, having a community can just make everything easier. And of course, I'll just say right now, if you're down in Vegas in October and November, email Steve at rec.poker. You can get a chance to crash at the Rec Poker House, and we're going to do some fun events over there. And that's all we do is community in the world of poker. So, all right, we've teased it enough. I'm so excited about this, Dara. One of the things that recreational players are probably, it's one of these low-hanging fruit areas where tournament players can really up their win rate, or at least their ROI, by being more ICM conscious. And so, Dara, can you talk a little bit about how, even though you might not win, talk a little bit about how you might use ICM to increase your ROI, even though you might be it might feel like you're taking more risks than you would be otherwise.
Yeah. ICM is one of those things, like, it's been around for a long time, 20 years now. And when I came into poker, it was already a thing. And I sort of started in sit and goes, online sit and goes, where ICM was very, very important. And Colin Moshman wrote a seminal book on sit and goes, which was mostly about ICM, it has to be said. The idea behind ICM is that, like, if say you're playing a cash game, if you win $100 pot, that's $100 you've won. So if you have a decision where, say, you have to call to win, let's say you have to call $50 to win $150, then you're gonna. It's always correct to call when you're getting the correct odds, when you're going to win one time in three. In that specific example, tournaments are more complicated because there isn't a linear relationship between your stack and how much you get. And the way you can really think about this is that, like, if you imagine a 100-runner tournament where everybody pays, let's say, $1,000, 100 runners, and they all start with 1,000 in chips. So at the start, every chip is worth $1. They pay $1,000 for 1,000 chips. Let's say the first prize is 20,000. Now, whoever wins the tournament at the end is going to end up with all the chips in the tournament. So they're going to end up with 100,000 chips, but they're only getting $20,000. So now each chip is really only worth 20 cents each. And, like, where's the missing money gone? Well, the money's gone to players who busted out and ended with 0 chips, but were in the money. So that's a very simple example, but basically strategically that affects the way you should play in tournaments. The easiest takeaway is that the upside is never as much as the downside. If winning 1,000 chips never adds the same amount to your actual equity in the tournament as losing 1,000 chips does. So you have to do all these sort of try to do these mental calculations and adjustments in game of, like, well, okay, the pot odds are 2-1, but actually because of the tournament, I probably need to win this not one time in 3, but maybe one time in 2.5. And do I have the right equity? And or knowing, is it one time in 2.5 or is it one time in 2? Just how extreme the ICM is. It makes a massive difference to your equity, because if you play tournaments like cash games and you don't make these adjustments, you're literally just torching money. You're burning money. Now, the first book I wrote on satellites, satellite poker strategy, that satellites are obviously the most extreme example of ICM, because, say a 10 seat satellite to the WSOP main event, you have 10 prizes of equal value. So it's very, very extreme, the adjustments you have to make. And then we wrote a book on PKOs, because PKOs are so popular online now that we thought, well, okay, there's a lot of those tournaments out there, but nobody really knows the strategy. So let's put out a book on the strategy. Then a lot of people came to us and said, okay, well, you've done those 2 types of tournaments. What about normal tournaments? Why don't you do something for them? And we had to think about it. And obviously it's a massive area, like teach someone to play tournaments. So we tried to focus on what we thought the biggest, most important thing was. And clearly it's ICM. Because, when people are studying tournaments, I mean, obviously you have to know how to play poker, and you have to, understand all the concepts, blind defense, c-betting, all of this stuff. But in terms of the actual difference it makes to your bottom line, a lot of that stuff makes very little difference. Like, let's say you put in thousands and thousands of hours of study and become very, very good with 100 big blinds. Well, the only time you have 100 big blinds is at the start of the tournament. And let's say you become so good that you add 2 big blinds per 100 to your win rate. which would be quite significant improvement. Well, okay, that's added 2% to your ROI, which is nice. But on the other hand, if you get something wrong at the end of the tournament, in the end game or on the bubble, you could be making a massive mistake. And I think we used this example in the book. A few years ago, my chip race co-host, David Lappin, made the final table of the bigger 55 on a Sunday. And he had a spot where he called off, I think with ace 10, and he felt it was probably a mistake. And when he told me the hand afterwards, I thought, yeah, I think ace 10 is probably wrong there. I think you probably need ace jack, but neither of us were sure because, it's a lot of it is guesswork. So we did run the spot, and yes, turned out our intuition was correct. Ace jack was a call and ace 10 was a fold. But the interesting thing was how big the mistake was. The mistake was like 40 buy-ins.
Wow.
So it was over $2,000. So
even though it was one of those cusp hands,
even though it's just one
so
pip,
close.
literally one pip. Yeah. So, so getting those spots right is going to make a massive difference. Like if one mistake right at the end is going to cost you 40 tournament buy-ins. Like if you can minimize those mistakes that you make over your career, that will make a huge difference to your expectation and how much money you make long term. So that's why we focus on ICM. The other reason why we thought the time was right to do an ICM book now was people have understood ICM sort of pre-flop for a long time. Lee Nelson et al. Wrote a really good book about 13 years ago called Kill Everyone, in which they really broke down ICM very, very well pre-flop. But everybody was kind of guessing how it affected the post-flop strategy, because there were lots of solvers out there for pre-flop spots. If you that spot that I talked about with David, we ran it in Hold'em Resources Calculator. There's another tool as well, ICMizer, which is the same. So you can actually get sort of exact data, exact solutions on these spots using those solvers. But it wasn't possible for post-flop until recently. The post-flop solvers only became ICM aware recently. So we were all kind of guessing what the adjustments were post-flop, but we couldn't really test it with solvers. Now we can. So like in the course of producing this book, we ran thousands and thousands of post-flop simulations. Not to put them all into the book, I hasten to add. Don't worry if you're thinking of buying the book and you're just going to see thousands and thousands of charts. It was just to try and distill the concepts. There were certain key concepts we identified, like, for example, when ICM is extreme, bet sizing post-flop tends to go down. When ICM is extreme and one player covers the other one, the player who covers can play much more aggressively in certain ways, and the player who is covered has to play much more passively. And the solvers sort of confirmed all of these key takeaways. So what we tried to focus on were the key concepts, rather than just, here's another simulation, here's another simulation, here's another simulation. But I think, yeah, to sort of sum up your overall point, like you're exactly right. And if you want to make a difference to your ROI, to how you do in tournaments, ICM is by far the most important thing you can study. Like people send me spots all the time, and particularly if they're very good players, they're just very, very close spots. Like I can give an opinion, it might be different from another player's opinion, and I'll run the spot, and the solver will say something like, call 80% of the time on the river, fold 20%, which basically means it doesn't matter what you do. Right. It literally doesn't matter. It makes no difference to your win rate long term. It's break even. And people focus on these spots. There's a couple of reasons why they focus on them. First of all, they're big spots, obviously. Somebody moves all in on the river, and now you have to decide whether to call or fold. That feels like a very big spot, but actually those spots, it doesn't make any difference. It makes almost no difference what you do in the long run. Because they're so close either way, but they feel very important. They feel much more important than sort of like, should I have called with ace jack there, or could I have called with ace 10, which are actually the ones that make by far the biggest difference to your win rate.
Yeah, and that's something that we actually just did our monthly seminar last night, where the theme was the final table, and we actually had a hand come up just like that, where a player had ace jack, and there was a 2x open. And then someone shoved like 14 big blinds. and this player was sitting with ace jack offsuit with 15 big blinds or something like that. And yeah, right. And they were, and they tanked, and weren't sure what to do, and they ended up making the call. And we were talking about it afterwards, about how ace jack is kind of like one of those cusp hands. And the only question was sort of like, is calling, like how it's always better to be the one to put the chips in first, I think, in these kind of spots. And so you talk a little bit about how you have to think about calling. Like I know you've said like the shorter stacks have to be more passive and tighter, but I think recreational players like us, we get in these spots a lot where like we see some action in front of us, but we've got a pretty good hand. How do we kind of think about whether we should be calling or not?
I mean, it's incredibly difficult, and like even when you've been doing it as long as I have, still every night there are spots where I'm playing online where I'm like, I'm really not sure whether I'm supposed to call or fold here. One of my favorite chapters in the new book is a chapter on how big a mistake is a mistake, and the thing we tried to get across in that is that like, shoving, even if it's a mistake, tends not to be a massive mistake,
right? Because
everybody might fold, and you said getting the chips in first, fold equity. Fold equity is the best type of equity deep in a tournament, and if you shove, you've given yourself maximum fold equity. So when you look at solver output and you see that like maybe ace 9 is the worst hand you're supposed to shove, but if you actually shove ace 6, you're not losing very much at all. It doesn't make much of a difference. But then calling mistakes can be absolutely massive. And again, this going back to the example I gave of David's mistake, he made a call with ace 10, which lost him over $2,000 in actual equity. So you have to really put a lot of study into calls. And the best way to do it, to be honest, is to just run lots and lots of spots with the preflop simulators, and you very quickly get an idea for the sort of the types of hands that are calls and the types of hands that are just never calls. And in extreme situations, that becomes even more important. Like in very, very extreme ICM situations, like let's say it's a final table bubble and you're second in chips and the chip leader shoves. That's the most extreme ICM situation you'll ever be in. And, when you run a few sims, you'll quickly see that like ace king suited, for example, is just never a call. You need a big pair, basically. They're the only hands you can call with. And if you run lots of these spots, you'll see like, you might see like, oh, well, jacks is always a call. But it has to be jacks, queens, kings, or aces. In satellites, there are spots where even aces might be a fold.
Right.
That's why on the cover of that book we do have somebody actually folding aces, just to make that point. So yeah, it's really just sort of learning by experience. Now, in terms of the way you have to think overall, again, we go into this in detail in the book. What I call guerrilla maths. It's a way you can try and work out at the table, well, what's the upside of winning compared to the downside of losing? Mm-hmm. So you sort of calculate your equity right now in the tournament and say, okay, this is roughly what my stack is worth. Now you can do that exactly with an ICM calculator, but obviously when you're playing at a live event, you don't have access to a thing. So we give a fairly simple, well, I think it's simple, but
relatively simple. Yeah.
Relatively simple, as simple as it can be, let's say, way of calculating. Okay, I have this many chips. This is the prize pool. This is how much my stack is worth. Now let's double that. So if I get all in against the chip leader and I win, let's see how much I'm going to win. If I get all in and lose, well, now I'm just getting whatever the next payout is. So, you might do that calculation and say, okay, well, if I double up, that makes me $5,000. But if I lose, I'm losing $10,000. Mm-hmm. So now you very quickly get an idea of, okay, well, I need to be a 2-to-1 favorite. Mm-hmm. Because losing cost me twice as much as winning gains. So I need to be a 66% favorite. And then now you're looking down at ace jack and going, there's no way ace jack is 66% favorite.
Right.
So that's sort of that's the best way you can do it in game. And there have been spots in my career where I've had to make big decisions live and, don't have access to the tools to run the spot. So I have done these mental calculations. And they do get you surprisingly close to what the actual ICM is.
Well, we love that here at Rec Poker, having, I just like the idea of the guerrilla math, right? Where it's just something I can do at the table that's going to give me a rough idea. And I know nerds like me, we let perfect be the enemy of good. And sometimes we like don't want to proceed until we have like certain information. But poker is not a game of certain information. Poker is a game of getting it pretty close in the time that you have, and then, you know, letting letting the world do the rest. Unfortunately, it would be great if we. I know there's the. I participate in this email tournament, this email free buy-in turn by turn based tournament that we start every fall. And it basically plays out over the course of like 9 months, taking turns every day to make your play. And, you know, that would be a good format to actually like have everything open on your computer, running every spot in real time and playing. But we don't have that luxury when we're playing actual cards. Yeah. So one thing you talked about, like training and drilling on ranges, pre-flop calling and shoving stuff. So I use Range Trainer Pro for that. And I think it's awesome. KL Cleaton put that program together, and it's got a lot of different ways you can adjust the position and the stack size and sort of the condition of the hand. Because it's a hard thing to practice other than just like running spots. So do you recommend any other tools or training or anything like that for how to get better at that analysis?
I've tried a lot of pre-flop tools, and like you, I've settled on Range Trainer Pro. I think it's by far the best. And I spend hours every week now training myself in those spots. They have a huge number of spots. There were a lot of spots where my ranges were definitely a bit wonky. Mostly the multi-way spots, I have to say. Like I obviously know my raise first in spots. I know my blind defense, etc., spots. I know how I act against a single raise. I pretty much have all the spots down. But like, you know, under the gun opens and mid position flats, and I'm in the cutoff. I was very, very unsure of what the sort of ranges are supposed to be. So it's a tremendous tool. They put a huge amount of work into it. Mm-hmm. And I know from talking to KL that they're currently working on ICM charts as well, where you can see how the ranges change due to ICM. So I think that's going to be a game changer when it comes, because ICM changes ranges so much. And that's something we kind of get across in the book as well. It's not just the fact that, you know, a lot of people think, okay, well, ICM's a thing, so now I have to be tighter. And they just like lop off the worst hands. It really doesn't work like that. Like there are some spots where you're actually adding hands while taking others away. There are certain types of hands which go up in value, typically suited aces and kings, and there are other hands which just go way down in value. And, you know, low to mid pocket pairs and suited connectors. So if you look at two different ranges, like 40 big blinds on the button, no ICM, versus 40 big blinds on the button with the chip leader in the big blind, the two ranges are just incredibly different. And you kind of have to know that. And it's funny, like, as tools come on the market, sometimes people worry, oh, this is going to kill poker now. Everybody's going to play perfect. I remember when Snapshot came out, everybody was like, oh my God, they're all going to be shoving perfect ranges. But all that happens is they start making different types of mistakes because people over apply what they have. Like, let's say they've got their 40 big blind ranges down with no ICM perfect. If they stick to those on a final table, they're going to get murdered in equity terms. So I think having access to actual proper ICM ranges, that'll make a huge difference to people too. Once they've added that, but yeah, Range Trainer Pro is a brilliant tool. And the two main tools I use for my own training these days are Range Trainer Pro for pre-flop and DTO for post-flop. And similar to Range Trainer Pro, DTO have just added ICM as well, which, you know, ICM changes everything. And it's great to see that people are thinking about ICM again, because we went through a period where sort of people just forgot about that and just sort of played, you know, standard ranges, etc. But you know, I won't repeat my earlier rant about how much money you can lose or burn by not understanding ICM, but like it really makes a huge difference. Yes, so those are the two tools that I recommend.
Well, obligatory plug here. If you go to rec.poker/resources, you can get a link to both Range Trainer Pro and DTO. And you can get a little discount there by using the code RecPoker. So I do agree with Dara. Those are great programs and a great way for recreational players like us to improve. So I see Eric and Jim and Paul are in the chat here. Like every week, our premium members are welcome to join us in the booth here. And if you guys have any questions for Dara, feel free to enter them. I've got a couple more here before we let you go, Dara. We talked a bit about sort of like the cost of calling poorly, and how that's pretty big. Like it's pretty big cost associated with calling incorrectly. And we talked about sort of the cost of shoving incorrectly as well, and how that's maybe not as big a mistake because you have all that extra fold equity. But can we talk a little bit about what's the cost of folding incorrectly? So there's like, obviously there's an opportunity cost, but like what is the, between raising incorrectly, calling incorrectly, and folding incorrectly, like what's the best of those what's the best mistake to make? Or is that too simple a way to think about it?
No, that's a good. That's a really good way to think of it. The way I would classify it is raising incorrectly is the least mistake, because it could actually turn out to be good if everybody overfolds, and even if they don't, like if you shove on the button, like the blinds are not going to find a hand often enough. Your call would be losing a bit, but it still will be. It won't be as much. Or sorry, your shove will be losing, but it won't be as much as a bad call. So raising is probably the lowest mistake, and the biggest mistake by far is calling. Calling mistakes can be absolutely massive, and that's why you really have to sort of focus on calling ranges when you're studying ICM. Folding, as you said, it's essentially an opportunity cost, because the EV of folding is always zero. Your stack doesn't change. You still have the same equity. So, like if you're unsure, if you think it's on the line, it's generally better to err on the side of folding, because if it turns out, let's say ace jack is the line and calling ace 10 is a mistake. Calling ace 10 will generally be a bigger mistake than folding ace jack. So if you're unsure as to where the line is, if in doubt, fold. Which from the man who said it, fold everything. That probably won't come as a surprise to people. The other thing I would say, and maybe this is something people don't think about enough, is that it very much depends on the type of tournament and the quality of the field that you're in. If I'm in a very, very soft tournament, where people are making very, very big mistakes, I don't mind making a fold that I know is probably slightly bad, because people will after I fold, I'm still in the tournament. I'm still around to take advantage of the big mistakes that they make later on. So I will actually make some quite tight folds in those spots, just to sort of lower variance and not give up very much EV. If, on the other hand, you find yourself at a table of absolute crushers and it's the final table, so it's not going to get any better, now you kind of have to just take those spots. If you think it's incorrect to fold, just don't do it. But as I said, like the line is more forgiving in that sense. Like calling with the best hand you're supposed to fold is usually a much bigger mistake than folding the worst hand you're supposed to call. So. So folding falls somewhere between raising, which is the least mistake, and calling, which is the biggest mistake.
Cool. Thank you. That's great. So my last question is, the biggest mistakes, the most expensive mistakes happen at the final table. That's, you start getting short-handed. You're seeing the blinds more often. People have to expand their ranges. It gets harder to range players post-flop because everyone's getting in there wider. It's also a very difficult thing to practice, unless you're just continuously going deep in actual tournaments. It's kind of a hard thing to simulate, to take it seriously as though there were ICM implications. So we do in our home game, we play it down to the final table every night. We do some other ways of like looking at those spots. We do a monthly review. I know you're involved with our monthly seminar, Dara, doing that Chris Jones runs, and this one was a final table, like I say. If you can't manufacture ways to actually practice shorthanded play, I think really just knowing the theory has to be your best defense or your best weapon, really, in these circumstances. So you have published a new book, and I think, are we breaking news today that it's actually available? So Dara, I love this guy coming on the Rec Poker podcast to announce the new book coming out. It's called Endgame Poker Strategy, the ICM book. And I'll put the link to the Amazon offering in the show notes here. Did Barry Carter release those naked photos of you, or are you still working with him He's still got the leverage on you.
He's still got that hanging over me and hanging over the poker world in general. I mean, nobody wants to see that, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, despite all his many flaws, Barry is here. One thing I've learned in this pandemic is Barry is a man who definitely needs a deadline. He has dragged his heels horribly on this book. He's kept promising me, oh yeah, we'll get it out next month, and it's dragged way past the point where it was decent. So we have a tournament coming up in Ireland soon, sponsored by Unibet, which will actually be the first tournament in Ireland in 18 months. And I said to him, it has to be out for this. We are going to do a book signing at this. You have to get it out.
Right.
Not only has he got it out in time for the tournament, which is still 3 weeks away, he's managed to somehow get it 3 weeks ahead of time. And last week I told him, you need to get it out before I go on Rec Poker because I want to announce it there.
Yes.
Exclusively for those guys. And again, he broke that deadline and went up last night. So yeah,
nice.
It's available on Amazon now. You guys will be able to get it. One thing I would say on you raised some very interesting points there about that you can't really practice shorthanded and ICM being so extreme on final tables, and that's something which comes up a lot. And it's an area where pros feel they sort of have a huge edge, that if they get down to the last 5 or 6, and then the last 4, and then the last 3, and they're playing against a recreational who's not used to playing three-handed, etc., that they'll have a big edge. I have a couple of very quick tips there, so I'm going to give them away first. First tip is people think that at least some people think that the further you get into the final table, the more extreme the ICM is. It's actually the other way around. ICM is at its biggest right at the start of the final table, and then after every elimination, it gets a little bit less. And by the time you get to heads up, there's no ICM anymore. You're two guys playing for the difference between. Two guys and girls playing for the difference between first and second. So that's the first thing to sort of realize. Focus your ICM decisions. And actually ICM is the points in the tournament when ICM are the biggest are obviously the bubble and the final table bubble. So that's where you sort of have to be zoned in on the ICM and understand your ranges. The second thing I would say is on playing shorthanded. Playing shorthanded feels very, very different from playing full ring. But in actual fact, there shouldn't really be any difference between raising on the button when you're three-handed to it's nine-handed and it's folded to you on the button. Your range should be pretty much the same. In fact, your range generally should be slightly tighter in the three-handed situation because there are less antes out there. At a nine-handed table, if everybody's folded to you and you're on the button and you raise, you have the chance to win the small blind, the big blind, and 9 antes. Three-handed, you only have the chance to win small blind, the big blind, and 3 antes. So your range actually should get a little bit tighter. Similarly, your defense ranges should be different. Now, it feels very different because all those early seats where you're mostly folding are taken out of the equation, and you kind of feel like you're involved every hand. And I think people often over-adjust in those situations, and they start thinking they have to really expand their ranges. Just focus on what your normal button range is. When you're four-handed, there are 4 ranges to consider: cut-off, button, small blind, and big blind. And just stick to those and you'll be fine. That's probably the single biggest tip I would say to playing shorthanded. Just like, don't over-adjust. Over-adjusting is really bad. And a lot of the mistakes that I see people make, it's because they're over-adjusting. They're on the button and they raise like 9-5 off, and you go, like, why did you raise 9-5 off? And the answer is, well, like, it's short-handed. I have to play more hands. You only have to play more hands because you don't have those early seats that you're not folding. You don't have to play more hands from every individual seat. In fact, you should be playing slightly less hands. So just think about your normal ranges and work from there.
That's a great point, because I think people do hear shorthanded, and even myself, I feel like, oh, okay, I have to play more hands here. But the fact is, you're just playing hands more frequently because the blinds are coming by more often and you're on the button more often. So you said it perfectly. You just don't have those early position spots to just fold. And so because you keep getting dealt the same random cards, you're going to be playing a higher percentage of the hands that you're dealt. But that doesn't mean that you actually have to open your ranges in the spots. That's a great distinction. Good thinking, Dara. I like that a lot. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions in the chat here. I'll just say again, Endgame Poker Strategy, the ICM book. So that's going to be available on Amazon by the time you hear this podcast. And And if you want to learn more about Dara, you can go to his Wrecking Crew page at rec.poker/doke and see some fun information about him there. Click on some links, see his other books, and see what he loves about rec poker. Dara, you're a great friend of the show, and I'm looking forward to getting your analysis on our members' play in the next monthly seminar. So I'll be sending that off to you too. Anything you'd like to leave us with before we send you off into the world?
Yeah, no, I'm very much looking forward to that hand. I did one for you guys last month.
Yeah.
It's always really interesting to me, sort of like running those spots and then working out why the solution is the way that it is, and trying to explain to it. That's sort of the approach we've taken with all the books we've written as well. So that all fits in very well. I think you guys do amazing work. It's, recreational players are the lifeblood of the game. The reason why I love going to the World Series, apart from trying to win lots of money and win a bracelet, it's not to play with other professionals, that's for sure. You meet lots of great people when you're there. It really feels like, normally summer camp. It's more like autumn camp this year. But
that's right.
And you guys do great work spreading the word. So I'm always happy to help out.
Well, thank you, man. I mean, I think one thing we have in common is that we love poker. We love good, fun poker players. It's something that we have in common with a lot of the poker community. I mean, there's some bad apples out there, and they're usually the loudest. And so I think poker community kind of gets soiled a little bit by having all these people in it that are so loud and obnoxious. But honestly, it's a very generous community. It's a very friendly community. It's a very supportive community. And if you're listening and you don't think that that's true, maybe you're just not hanging out with the right people. So go to rec.poker, get a free account, learn more about Dara and the great stuff he's doing with people like Barry and David. And your journey is just beginning. So don't be afraid to make mistakes and share your mistakes with the group. And, that's how we all get better. So I'm looking forward to that. All right, Dara. Well, I know I'll think of a couple other questions as soon as you hang up, but that's just the way. We'll have to have you back on sometime again soon.
Awesome. Yeah, anytime. It's always a pleasure.
Cheers. Well, you can hang up here. I'll take care of a couple of little things in Memberland before we end the show. But thank you again, my friend. Looking forward. I hope you do get down there. Maybe we can catch up in Vegas.
Yeah, no, I really hope so too. Even if it's just for the very last event.
Yeah, right. That's a good one. All right, you take care, my man.
Thanks, guys. And thanks everyone in the chat.
Cheers. All right, so Eric, Jim, and Paul in the chat here. If there's anything else that you'd like to mention before we get into the ad and start running things out, I guess I'll just I don't see any comments. I'll just run the commercial right here, and then we can pick it up on the other side and talk about some community events at Rec Poker.
Have you ever wondered whether you should call a preflop raise or 3-bet instead? What do you do when you have a flush draw? Do you raise it or do you just call? What do you do with ace-king when you miss the flop? Are you tired of guessing about what the right play is with your particular hand? Well, my name is Jonathan Little, and I am a 2-time World Poker Tour champion and creator of PokerCoaching.com, where we offer over 1,000 interactive hand quizzes where you play a hand and then get real-time feedback from our world-class pros. Don't guess and don't stress. Just register for your free account at PokerCoaching.com/recpoker right now.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for your support as always. So here we are. It's the end of the show. We're going to, so a couple notes. We're actually going to be taking a bit of a hiatus on the Chats podcast because we're going to be down in Vegas. It's going to be difficult to coordinate getting together with guests. So you're going to hear one next week with AJ Rudolph from Poker Power, and then we'll probably take a few weeks off for Vegas. We'll continue doing the forums edition of the podcast because we recorded a few of those in advance because the strategy stuff isn't quite as time sensitive as some of the events that we usually talk about. So if you miss a few, or if you notice a few episodes of the Chats are missing as you go through your October, that's why, but we will be back. On October 9th, which you should have a chance to join us for this if you're a premium member, Keith Brandt, Monkey System, is going to be hosting his brand new type of study group, which works with advanced poker training. So he's going to be using their software to help premium members at Rec.Poker find ways to improve their game. And the last note, on October 10th, this will be the last podcast that goes out before the 10th, I think. It's Colin Anderson's birthday. Colin Anderson is a great friend at Rec Poker. He's the host of the Reckies. He's a wonderful, generous soul. He's won the Sunday night tournament a few times, which means he's got a few months of free training at Learn Pro Poker. So he's such a good guy. He said, guys, give these months that I've won to other members at Rec Poker that deserve it. So we said, okay, birthday boy, Colin's going to be playing in the LPP tournament on Sunday night on October 10th on his birthday. And if you take him out, you're going to win a bounty of 1 month at Learn Pro Poker. So spoil the birthday boy's fun, knock him out of the tournament, maybe buy him a beer next time if you see him, and then email me, jim@rec.poker, and we'll make sure you get that free month. So without further ado, I think that's all we have here. It's always a pleasure hosting the show. I want to thank Eric, Jim, and Paul, and Kim, who couldn't quite join us. Of course, Dara O'Kearney, and Website Amp, and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Thanks, Rec Poker.